up our very special guest, Mr. Chris Newman, Mr. Chris Macro, Mr. The Spreadsheet Guru. Chris, first off, I got to ask you, Chris Macro, where did that come from?
That was actually a nickname that one of my managers gave me because I was doing all this crazy macro stuff. And when I was building my website, I was like, that'd be kind of a cool little nickname that would differentiate myself and make me stick out, and kind of went with it.
Remember the first time that I mentioned you on the show, it was, guys, must have been like episode number 2 or 3, and I think you had just released something. I said, okay, well, everybody go check out Chris Macro. And I remember mentioning to Jordan at the time, I said, hey, this on the show actually, I said, this sounds like a made-up name. It's probably really Joey Macro or Andrew Macro or something like that, but Chris Macro, that just doesn't sound right. So
yeah, too good to be true.
Also, recall that Mr. Jordan Goldmeyer, his claim to fame is living close to you. Is there any truth in that, or is that all just fiction?
That is true. We actually had dinner one night together and talked about it. It was very romantic.
A little bromance. I like it. The show's about to get interesting.
Can I?
Nice.
I just want to point something out real quick that Rick did think it was made up in the same way that he thinks Secaucus, New Jersey is made up. So my reputation.
It's all bogus, man. It's all bogus.
It's all,
Chris,
you know,
this is a very popular question. A lot of people ask you that, the Chris Macro thing. I do want to hear more about that transition, and I would like to pitch it to Bravo while we're at it, if you don't mind. Jordan, you were saying something clever when I interrupted you.
Oh, no, it wasn't that clever. But yes, tell us more about how you became known around the office, and because I think a lot of people sort of get their start that way. How did you start dabbling in such that you got that nickname?
Yeah, so when I first started in my career, I was in a rotation program, and I was kind of going through the rotation program, and that was basically you would be in a position within the finance department for 6 months and then rotate. So I was talking with someone, and he happened to be a director who had just lost an analyst, his only analyst. And somehow I made a good first impression, and he said, I want you to fill my position while I go hire someone. And he was looking for an engineer with a finance background, so it was very hard and specific to come by. So I had 2 weeks with this analyst early on in my career, and she did all this crazy VBA stuff and all these crazy lookups, and I was still kind of fresh, just getting a hang of the VLOOKUPs and what spreadsheets were. And I had 2 weeks to learn all that she did, and I did not learn close to enough of what I needed to. So I was kind of left by myself. In the group I was at, I was kind of supposed to be the support person in Excel. So I was kind of left on my own to kind of figure out how all her crazy macros worked, and first thing I did was go to Google, and I happened to find this forum called MrExcel.com. So I hopped on that, and I typed in a question, and 2 minutes later I had an answer, and I was like, hey, that's pretty cool.
Probably Zach Parisi up there helping you out.
Yeah, so little by little, I just kind of worked my way through and kind of taught myself VBA, and no one was really using VBA at the time, and that was kind of like an outside consultant would come in and write some VBA for someone to do a task, and they didn't really have anyone in-house. So as I left that role when they eventually filled it and went through the rotation, I was doing all this cool VBA stuff through each rotation, and I kind of soon became known as the Excel expert for the whole company, just because I kept learning and getting on those forums, and hence the name Chris Macro.
It's a very familiar story, isn't it? I mean, and I'm sure you would agree, this is kind of somewhat unique to our industry, or, you know, if we call ourselves Excel experts, because like you couldn't do this if you were in the medical field, right? You couldn't be like, you know, he was leaving in 2 weeks and the patient had this ginormous tumor, and, you know, there was all this code baked into the medical files, and, you know, so I just started looking on WebMD, and I figured I would, and I had 2 weeks to figure it out, and then I was there. So it's very unique to our field, because you just hear this story again and again, and in fact, that little it was meant to be funny, I hope. That little bit, that's what I was thinking when I was listening to you on that podcast. I was like, could you imagine if it was like a surgeon or something? Be like, yeah, I didn't know anything about, I didn't even know what a scalpel was, but, you know,
I had access to the internet.
You're in the deep water and you gotta swim. So, but that said, you know, not everybody gets hooked on VBA like you obviously did in such a short amount of time. In fact, I see a lot of people who are like, yeah, VBA, and then the minute they realize what's involved, it's kind of like suddenly, you know, the energy suddenly changes and they sort of give up. So what was it for you? What is it about you, Chris, that you think made it so interesting, or what do you love about it?
Well, I at first it wasn't interesting at all. It was more of a necessity.
It was a rotation.
It was more of a necessity, and I still have the code because it was so long and crazy. And if you know anything about VBA, you know that looping can save a lot of time and effort. And this individual had not taught herself how to loop. So I was just left with thousands and thousands of lines of code, and I was just expected to update it at year end. So I kind of had, I think, 4 or 5 months to kind of figure out how to update this code.
Right.
So I kind of started from the beginning and tried to find some beginner kind of articles, and I was on the forums a lot. And once I kind of knew and started to see what all I could do and how much time I could save, I just got addicted to it. So I just kept, it just seemed like every time I hopped on the forums, I was learning something new, and I can shorten my code by 10 lines and do it just with 1 line of code, and it's crazy how much stuff you can really do with VBA.
Right. So how do you kind of separate, because I know what you're saying about it being addicting, how do you kind of separate when it's time to not do everything in VBA, you know, versus just like writing a formula or something like that?
Yeah, so I think you go through stages. So I definitely went through a stage where I was just doing everything in VBA and forgetting about formulas, because I just thought it was so cool, and I liked clicking the button and just having it go. And then you kind of go back to the stage where you're working with people who don't really know VBA, and you're getting back into the formulas, and it kind of clicks that, oh, maybe I could be doing this easier and faster by just doing formulas and not having to worry about updating VBA code all the time. So it's definitely a talent to know how much VBA or when to use VBA versus the spreadsheet formulas, and that's something that takes some time to master, and I still struggle with it every day.
So at what point did you think, hey, I should start writing a blog, and why? I mean, you know, there's so many people who just become the office experts. What motivated you to transition into creating a blog?
Yeah, so it was kind of a progression. So going back to when I was going through all those rotations and doing all this crazy stuff no one had seen in Excel before, when I was leaving, the managers were kind of freaking out because they had to pass that work on to someone else, and if a change came up, they were scared that they wouldn't know how to fix it. So kind of the solution we came up with was I started teaching advanced Excel classes once a month to the whole finance department. And then anyone who was kind of interested in that stuff could attend. And through that, I kind of started making like these articles and lessons and sharing those. And I kind of came to an idea one day just to kind of post that on the web. Wouldn't it be great if I can just point my coworkers to a website? And it kind of started off as that, and I would have coworkers come up to me and say, "Oh, I couldn't. How do you do something like this?" And I would look at it and was like, "Well, did you Google it?" And they would say, "Yeah, but all it got me were forums, and I don't really like going through the forums because I get confused." So then I would start writing articles and posting it there, just specific stuff that was kind of just hard to find on Google. So that's kind of how it snowballed, and it started taking off, and I started promoting it a little bit and started meeting really cool people in Excel like you guys, and it's just kind of grown from there.
I'm sorry, were you talking to us?
No, yes, no, especially guys. And speaking of those cool guys that are out there on the internet, you know, some of those Excel bloggers, many of them watch the show, and I have some questions for you, Mr. Chris Macro. So here we go. This comes from John Michelotis of myexcelonline.com. He also runs a podcast. So go check that out. I believe you were on the first episode of this podcast, so that's out there as well. So go check that out. And his question to you, Mr. Chris Macro, is, with the intro of Power BI tools, that was very nice. The intro of Power BI tools, do you think that there will be less or more reliance on custom Excel add-ins?
Well, so custom Excel add-ins are just that, they're custom, so they're really particular to your business needs. I think all these tools that Microsoft is putting out are definitely going to help people kind of get to that more visual aspect of analysis, but behind the scenes, if you need something really specific to your niche, you're gonna need something like VBA or Excel formulas to do that for you. So I think they're definitely heading toward the right track, but I think there's always going to be a place for VBA and formulas in the workplace.
That was the correct answer. 15 points. All right, but here's a tough one. Here's a tough one from Kauser Ahmed. ExcelDemy.com, so think of Udemy, ExcelDemy, so I'm going to say that wrong, ExcelDemy.com, so go check them out. Here is his question for you, Mr. Chris Macro. Some people approach to learn Excel VBA, but they have no prior knowledge of programming. What is the easiest way to teach them in VBA?
Ooh.
So that's kind of my situation. I had no computer programming background or anything like that. I think definitely taking a class would help, or reading a book. I did that later on, and I wish I would have started out with that because it made a lot more sense. And definitely getting on forums, because I mean, there's so much knowledge out there, and there's so many smart people that are just willing to share what they know, and they'll walk you through it, baby steps, and they're great resources out there for you to learn.
Question, follow up on that briefly. But would it have been, you said, so you read a book, maybe like John Walkenbach or something. This is very similar to my VBA journey. Would it have made more sense to start with a book? Because how could you be interested in that unless you've already played around with the macro recorder? Like, in fact, I talk about this in my book. No plugs there. Yeah, so like for me, I played around with the macro recorder for a long time, and I sort of realized, you know, that was not going to be a long-term thing, and I had to at some point read a book. But I wouldn't have been able to stick with it if I hadn't already been. My interest wasn't piqued by playing around with the macro recorder. So I'm just curious if you
Yeah.
want to.
Yeah, I mean that's a valid point. I liked having just a book where I could look up in the index at the back of the book
Right.
and kind of have a one-shop stop to get an answer right away instead of going all through Google. But I mean, for example, with the VBA course I took, I was probably the most well-educated in VBA out of the 6 or 7 students that were there. But I only understood like half of it. And it wasn't until maybe 6 months afterwards where I started doing some more advanced stuff and digging into the libraries and kind of understanding how all that worked, that I kind of remembered in the back of my head, oh, that's what he meant, and that's what he was talking about when he was going through those lessons. So I think it's definitely a give and take on that, and you're right. You're not gonna, if you want to learn VBA, you're not gonna just sit down and read a computer programming book and absolutely love it and understand it. It's gonna take time.
Jordan does. That's how Jordan did it.
That's sitting under a tree like Johnny Appleseed. That's Jordan with a VBA book.
It's true, man.
I mean, yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably true. So congratulations. You only got 4 points on the initial answer, but the follow-up question kind of put you over. So congratulations on that.